Number 1. This took place a while ago, but I'll probably never forget it. I was around 21 at this time and was still fairly new in my city. I had just gotten out of a bad relationship and wasn't in the best place mentally, and didn't know a lot of people in town besides my ex and his friends. I was on a dating/hookup app looking for people to hang out casually with, hopefully finding a new friend or something along those lines. I had matched with a 25-year-old guy. His name was Simon. We talked sporadically in the app for a few days. He explained he was in a band and living in a house with his bandmates. He sent me their music. It was just audio on YouTube with a heavily edited still image of 4 of the 5 guys playing rock instruments. One of them looked like him. The music was an interesting combination of styles, and not really for me, but whatever. He seemed like a nice enough guy. He stopped replying for a few days, and I figured that was that. Moved on. Then one day, I was at work and got a message from him saying sorry he'd been so busy and inviting me to a barbecue with his friends and bandmates in their yard. He had explained to me that their band manager was providing them the house to live in. Based on the lack of views on the YouTube video and the fact I only saw one photo of him playing in the band, I figured he was probably exaggerating the band manager thing. I thought it was more likely something along the lines of a bar manager friend giving them a discount on rent in exchange for being a house band at their bar or something, and didn't think much of it beyond that. Normally, I would have just said no to going to a barbecue alone at the home of someone I really didn't know, but I was really bored and figured I might be able to overcome some social anxiety and maybe even make some female friends there, since he made it sound like a pretty big party. I put the neighborhood he gave me into maps, and it was a suburban area with lots of families as far as I knew. I figured being in a yard on such a nice summer day wouldn't be overly risky because lots of neighbors would be outside. Plus, it was just a few train stops away from my workplace, and I was off in a few hours. I told him I wasn't overly comfortable with the idea, since I didn't know him well, but I would stop by for a bit if I didn't need to go inside the house at all. He said that was totally fine, which made me feel a lot better. I even made sure to not drink anything for the rest of my shift, so I wouldn't be risking needing to go inside to use the bathroom. I was anxious about just showing up to a barbecue with people I didn't know at all, as he implied that the event was already underway. Plus, I would have had a hard time finding a specific address from the backyard side, so I asked Simon if he could meet me at the train station, since he said it was a quick walk anyway. He agreed to do that, and I let him know when I was leaving work and what time maps said the train would get to his station. I sent Simon a message to tell him that I had arrived at the train station around 5:30 after I looked around and couldn't find him. He told me he was running behind and to just start walking towards the neighborhood. I was about halfway across the massive train station parking lot when I saw him slowly wandering towards me. I recognized his clothes. He was wearing bell-bottoms when they were not really common, especially for men, and long hair from far away, but up close his face looked pretty different from his photos. It might have been some heavy-duty editing. I don't even know, but he kind of looked like a different guy. Older looking than the 25-year-old guy in the photos by 5 to 10 years. Maybe he used photos of his younger brother or something. I don't even know. It was before AI. This was the first real red flag, but I brushed it off. Maybe he's just self-conscious. Maybe he smokes a lot and doesn't wear sunscreen, and hasn't taken pictures in a while. All of his pictures looked candid, so I figured he wasn't much of a selfie guy. And besides, I'm mostly here to make friends anyway, so I shouldn't judge his appearance so harshly, right? He was also clearly already drunk, but a lot of my ex's friends were heavy drinkers, so that didn't seem strange. He's hosting a barbecue after all. The second red flag came shortly after when we arrived at the front door. I reminded him that I wasn't comfortable going inside the house, but he assured me we would just have to walk through to get to the backyard. Okay, fine. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood where you could just walk around the house to get to the backyard. We would have had to backtrack to the main road to go down the alley directly to the backyard. I figured he'd just forgot what I said about not wanting to go inside and didn't want to cause a bunch of trouble, so I went with it. We got in the house, and he immediately closed the door and locked the deadbolt and knob behind me. I didn't think that was too weird, since nobody was hanging out inside, and a lot of people are just in the habit of locking the door when they come in. But it did still give me the heebie-jeebies for some reason. Then, Simon then told me he'd really like to give me a tour of the house. I politely declined and reminded him that I was just there for the barbecue. He said that he and his bandmates had worked really hard to get the house, and he was really proud of it. At that point, I was getting really skeptical because usually when guys would tell me things that seemed a bit far-fetched, they'd let the truth slip by the time they got me to their house. But still, I convinced myself that I was being unreasonable. I was already in this stupid house anyways. He insisted it'd be quick. Not the wisest choice, I know. But I was pretty good at explaining away red flags, so at this point, Simon still mostly had a dopey stoner art guy kind of vibe, as far as I was concerned. He really didn't seem like a threat, just an insecure oddball who sucks at communicating and lies a bit. Not unlike my ex, who was definitely emotionally and verbally abusive, but it never escalated past that. I figured at worst, he'd get handsy and I'd get called a prude for not sleeping with him. I didn't have a lot of self-worth at the time, obviously, so I went with it. The tour started pretty uneventfully, other than that the decor in the common areas was obviously chosen by a middle-aged Martha Stewart enthusiast, and not a bunch of guys in a band or their fake band manager. I didn't know if this should make me feel better or worse. On one hand, he was clearly lying, but on the other, it made me think it was probably just someone's mom's house, and she was out of town, and he didn't want to tell me he lived at a friend's parents' home and didn't actually have a paying job. Again, total red flag, but I could rationalize it at the time. The bedroom doors were all closed. Bathroom was unremarkable. He then showed me the kitchen, and I finally saw through the window that there was nobody in the backyard. There weren't even barbecue supplies around. No burgers thawing on the counter, no cocktail supplies lying around, nothing. I asked him where everyone was and why he lied about the barbecue, and he told me that his bandmates were still on tour. They were just running behind due to van trouble, but they should be back any minute so we could start the party. I asked him why he wasn't on tour with them since he's in the band. I don't even remember what his answer was to that because it didn't make any sense. At this point, I'm out of mental gymnastics to convince myself that this guy isn't just completely full of shit. And I'm really freaked out. Took me long enough, I suppose. I hoped that once he was done with the tour, we could go back outside, even just for a minute, and I'd just leave. I'd been in some sketchy situations in the past, but luckily nothing so bad that they tried very hard to physically stop me when I walked away in a semi-public place. I just wasn't comfortable doing it inside the house. By this point, I knew this guy was full of shit, but I had no idea how much worse it would get. I instinctively pretended to believe his bullshit. He offered me a beer. I said no thanks because I had to work in the morning. He said all right and cracked one for himself. Then he wanted to take the tour downstairs. I could see from the top of the stairs that the basement was the dark and creepy kind with really small windows, so I refused. I asked if we could go back outside. He said after the tour. I tried arguing about not going into the basement, told him I have arachnophobia, don't like basements, etc., etc. These were all lies, but it was anything that wouldn't let him realize that he was what I was afraid of. He started to get agitated about my reluctance, so I figured it would be better to just let him show me the damn basement, and then hopefully we could go outside because I really didn't know what else to do. The basement was fairly unremarkable. Couch, TV, elliptical. Until I noticed something that gave me chills. The house was probably built in the 1990s or late 80s at the absolute earliest. But I saw a door that just looked like the heavy foam-lined door to the cold storage room in my grandma's house. The kind that only opened from the outside. It was just a smaller version of the big metal doors on commercial walk-in fridges. It looked really out of place. I would absolutely not go anywhere near that door. He opened it and told me it was their soundproof music studio. I looked inside from a few meters away. It did indeed look soundproof. It's about the size of a bedroom, and I could see a few guitars and amps inside of it. Mattress toppers on the walls, no drum set or recording equipment that I could see. He insisted I go inside to get a better look. He was standing outside the door, motioning for me to go inside. Holy shit, the alarm bells are really going off now. At this point, I realized I could totally die here if I'm not careful, and I turned around to run up the stairs. He closed the door and followed me, asking what's wrong, acting like I'm being all unreasonable for not wanting to see his soundproof music studio. So I'm realizing that this is a way sketchier situation than any of my ex's bullshit, and I am freaked out. At this point, my main objective was getting out of the house. The front and back doors were both closed and locked, so if I tried to run, he'd be able to get to me before I could get the locks open. The bathroom did not have a window. The house had a convoluted floor plan that I wasn't familiar with, and he was much bigger than I am. He was the tall, lanky type who can run fast even if they're out of shape and smoke a pack a day. I pretended that I was okay hanging out with him in the hopes that he'd chill out a bit. We made small talk for a few minutes. He cracked another beer and thankfully he calmed down. I desperately mentioned yet again that it was a beautiful day outside and suggested we go sit in the yard while we wait. He said no and started to get agitated that I wanted to leave already. I told him that I could stay, but I just really like to smoke a cigarette. He told me that we could smoke cigarettes inside and pointed to a cereal bowl full of cigarette butts. God damn it. We sat down at the table and lit some cigarettes. As he was smoking, he started rolling a joint, which he promptly lit as soon as his cig was done. He offered me some and I said no thanks. He insisted, so I took the smallest puff I could. I'm a pretty seasoned weed smoker myself, but I pretended to cough excessively and told him I'm a novice, so that's more than enough for me. For a liar himself, he thankfully wasn't very good at picking up on the lies of others. After we smoked, he asked if I'd like to watch a movie until his bandmates get back. I told him that I was really looking forward to spending the day outside and suggested we go for a walk or visit the park. Ideas he did not like or appreciate. At this point, I was trying to keep as much distance as possible between us, but he stayed close enough to me that I could smell the beer on his breath. He grabbed me by my waist, and I backed away and asked about the barbecue food to try and change the subject and make him think I still believed what he was telling me. He started to get angry again and sternly reiterated that his bandmates should be home any minute, and my anxiety was absolutely through the roof. I tried to calm him down again with generic small talk. Now, I don't know how I got so lucky, but the next thing that happened might have saved me. Simon went to the fridge to get another beer, and he pulled out an empty box. At this point, he's getting even more pissed off than before. So I went out on a limb and suggested we get some more beer for the party, because I was out of ideas. I was terrified that it would enrage him even more to suggest, once again, that we leave the house, but I had to try. Thankfully, though, his eyes lit up with the possibility that I could actually be down to drink with him, and he agreed. As we were walking to the liquor store, I still didn't really have a plan because I was no longer comfortable just walking away from this fucking menace in this weirdly desolate suburb. But I was extremely relieved to be out of that house. I walked with him to the liquor store, and when we got there, told him I didn't need to go inside if he was just going to go grab some beer. He insisted that I had to, and at that point, I was so stressed and frazzled, I just went with him and hoped that a good opportunity to leave would arise. When we got inside the liquor store, he asked what kind of beer I wanted. I reminded him that I had to work tomorrow and didn't want to drink much. He demanded to know what kind of beer I wanted, so I just named the first one that came to mind. We went to pay. The cashier was kind of an asshole, so I didn't ask for help. I probably should have, but I panicked and didn't. I hoped there might be somebody in the parking lot who might help me if I made a scene, but there was nobody. I really regretted not asking the liquor store guy for help, but also remembered the times my ex told people I was crazy, so they wouldn't take me seriously. Liquor store guy definitely seemed like he would have fell for that, so probably for the best, I didn't expect him to help me. I had one last idea before I took my chances just trying to run or scream. There was a drugstore across from the liquor store. I told Simon I had to go buy a toothbrush or some shit that vaguely implied I might stay over. He eagerly agreed to this, but tried to follow me into the store. I told him that you're not allowed to bring beer into a drugstore. I don't know if that's even true. I really doubt it's any kind of law, but luckily this drunk douchebag believed it and agreed to wait outside. Now, my naive ass thought maybe I could just wander around in this drugstore for long enough, and he would either get the hint or get sketched out or bored and leave. But no, I must have wandered around the store for at least half an hour, and this jackass is still just standing there staring in the window. This creep didn't even have his phone out. Every time I checked if he was still there, he was just staring through the window, looking for me. I didn't feel like I had anybody I could call in the city to come help me. The cops here don't usually take things like this very seriously, and the store workers looked like they were mostly high school students, and I didn't want to drag them into this, so I really didn't feel like I had a lot of options. After being in there for so long, I was surprised he didn't come in to see what was taking me so long. I thought maybe I could lose him in the aisles and sneak out of the store if he did come in, but nope. I ended up hovering around the tills and waited until a big group of friendly-looking people were paying. I followed them out of the store and immediately told Simon to leave me alone and go home. I said it firmly and loudly enough to imply that I would make a scene if need be. Simon looked at the people getting in their car, who were now pausing and looking at us because I had nearly yelled at him. And then he just turned around and left. It was bizarrely anticlimactic, which I was very thankful for. I ran to the train station, which thankfully was in a different direction than his house from the store, and I never heard from him again. When I got home, his app profile had either blocked me or been deleted. Years later, after I stopped compartmentalizing the whole thing, I wish I would have reported him or something. It bothers me to wonder if he tried it again with someone else, but made sure the fridge was stocked first. But at the time, I didn't think anybody would take me seriously. I was embarrassed of my choices, and I just wanted to move on from the whole thing. Plus, all I really had was a likely fake first name and a general idea of where the house was, which probably wasn't even his. I'll probably never know any more than I do now, and maybe that's for the best. Number 2. Back when I was 12, I went to a private school, so I needed to take a long walk to my apartment, since the school was a bit far from the city center. This was in Zagreb, Croatia, so I had a lot of public transport options to get home. My usual routine was to get on the bus at the station in front of my school, all the way down to the main street, then take a tram to a public park and walk home the rest of the way. Our school had a double timetable where one week we went to school in the morning and the other week we had classes in the afternoon. This happened during one of my afternoon weeks. I was walking out with a few classmates since we all got on the same bus to the main street. The rest of my classmates were picked up by their parents. When we got in the bus, there were a few empty seats, so I took a seat in front of a balding middle-aged man who was wearing slightly dirty clothes. That was my mistake. As soon as I sat down, he started staring at me, like staring with a cold look in his eyes. Feeling uncomfortable, I took a book out of my bag and started reading. I would have used my phone if I could, but it was dead since I forgot to charge it before I left the house that day. This guy did not stop staring at me the whole bus ride, to the point where I couldn't even concentrate on my book, but I refused to put it down because I was scared. I would have mentioned something to my classmates, but we were all spread out on the bus, and I was too scared to move. I don't know why, but I didn't want him to see that I was scared, thinking maybe that would deter him. Or maybe I thought he was just staring at me for some stupid reason. When we finally got to our stop, my classmates and I all got off, and some of us headed to the tram station while the others walked away to their houses. The guy who was staring at me also got off with us, and he started tailing us while keeping a fair distance. I told one of my friends about this, but urged him not to look back, thinking ignoring him would be the best option. When we got to the station, different people got on different trams, since each of them had a different route. I needed to take tram number 2, and so did my friend. We waited for it to arrive, and the guy was somewhere to our right, but we refused to look at him. When our tram arrived, my friend and I got on, but so did the creepy guy. When I arrived at my stop, I tried to quietly discuss with my friend if getting off with me just in case was a good idea, but then we saw the guy get off himself first and start heading into the park, opposite of where I needed to go. He probably overheard us talking since there were barely any people in the tram at that time. It was around 9 p.m. in the evening. But I didn't think of that, so I thought it had all been a misunderstanding. When I got off and the tram had sped away to the next station, I started walking home. It was a short distance and would have taken me about 5 minutes, but then I noticed someone following me. I immediately knew it was the same guy again, so I picked up my pace and walked to my apartment. As I turned a corner into the alley that housed my apartment, the guy was getting closer. I got to the building and buzzed my mom on the intercom. I wish she would hurry up, but in the end the guy managed to catch up with me. I could smell the stench coming off from him as he started talking.
Hey, how you been, buddy? I saw your dad yesterday and he told me all about how you were getting in on that new school of yours,
he said. And then I immediately knew that he was lying, since my dad had been away on work-related business for months and hadn't returned home in that time once. I had no idea what to do, so I just stood there quietly staring at him. Just then, the door buzzed and unlocked, so I bolted for it. I managed to rush in and start running up the stairs, but he was following behind me, running himself. Never in my life have I felt such an adrenaline rush as I ran up the stairs to the 3rd floor, and I had a backpack with books weighing me down, so I had a disadvantage. But in the end, I managed to arrive at our door, where my mom was happily waiting for me. With no warning, I shoved her away from the door as I entered before slamming it shut. Fortunately, the guy had enough common sense not to continue chasing after me. I told my mom what happened, and she called the police, and they arrived sometime later, questioning me on how the guy looked and what exactly happened. In the end, they looked at the camera footage, but since it was so dark out and I didn't turn on the indoor building lights as I entered, they weren't able to get a clear view of his face. For 2 weeks, I was too scared to go home alone, so my mom picked me up every time until 2 weeks later, when on the news, it was said how a man was arrested for attempted kidnapping and raping of children, and the face they showed was the exact one I saw that night. So I finally breathed a sigh of relief, knowing I was safe for now, but that didn't excuse the fact that I was careless with not charging my phone, and there were still many bad people out there. Everyone, please stay safe out there. To the person who I met, if you ever get released for some ungodly reason, I hope I never see you again. Number 3. This happened when I was about 12 or 13. For important context, I lived in an apartment complex that was 2 sets of rows, each row with 4 apartments. I lived in the apartment closest to the street of one row, and had 2 cousins that lived in the apartment at the very end of the row, in the back. I would hang out with them just about daily. We were very into soccer at the time, and we would walk to a park about 4 or 5 streets away along with some of the neighborhood kids and play soccer there. Now, I say neighborhood kids, but it was a big group of about 15 kids total, and the ages ranged from about 10 years old all the way to 17. One of my 2 cousins was the 17-year-old, which is why my parents allowed me to go without their supervision. So, on this day, like usual, we made our way to the park. Some of us would walk, some would ride scooters or skateboards. I had my bike that day. We get to the park and we start playing. About halfway through our game, my parents drive by and they call to me from our car. They tell me that they're going to the store and to wait at the park for them. Okay, no big deal. I figure they must want to go somewhere else afterwards, and it's easier to pick me up from the park than for me to wait back at the house. Of course, this doesn't make sense because it's a 4-street distance, but at the time, to my 12-year-old mind, it was perfectly logical. We keep playing for about another hour. Then, as we get closer to sunset, more and more kids start making their way back to their houses. When my cousins wanted to leave, they asked me if I was ready, and I said that my parents told me to wait for them here. So they left and I stayed behind. Eventually, it was just me. No big deal. I'm familiar with the neighborhood and I have my bike and the energy of a 12-year-old. So I start riding my bike up and down the street, just killing time. At this point, it hasn't occurred to me that if my parents wanted me to wait for them at the park, they wouldn't want me to wait past sunset. Eventually, I get impatient and hungry, but not wanting to get grounded for disobeying my parents, I kept waiting. Except instead of waiting at the park, I crossed the street and was waiting there. After a few minutes, a car drove up and stopped next to me. Nothing scary yet. There's a stop sign there, so I don't really pay it much mind, except when it drove away, I realized the car looked weird. It was old and boxy like an 80s car, but what stood out was that it looked spray-painted gray. It was definitely not real car paint or done by a professional. I don't know if someone who stole a car would be dumb enough to draw that much attention to it, or if the look was intentional, but you could tell that it was just spray-painted all over. Anyway, it drove away and I kept waiting, annoyed now. Then the car comes back from the other side of the street. I noticed it because it was hard to ignore at that point, but my survival instincts are still not kicking in. Maybe they were lost or just wanted to turn around without doing a U-turn. And since the park is a big square, going around it and coming back is easy enough to do. A few minutes go by. They drive up again and again, stop at the stop sign. This time, I'm starting to get nervous, so I look at the car. 2 men are inside, very scruffy looking. Unkempt beards, unkempt hair, dirty faces, stains on their shirts. They look at me. They both smile at the same time. They look at each other, smile even bigger in the creepiest smile I've ever seen someone do to this day, then drove away. Their smile creeped me out so much that I was now on high alert. In particular, I was watching the other side of the park, where they would come from if they went around again like they did the first time. Sure enough, they did. This also means that they were now on the same side of the street as me, so as soon as I saw the car, I jumped on my bike and rode as fast as I humanly could. I could hear one yelling something, but I honestly don't know what it was. I was too busy riding for my life. I could hear the car catching up, but I was too scared to even turn around. I somehow made it to my street and ran into the building, but I didn't want them seeing where I lived since my apartment would have been the one visible from the street. So I went to the back, behind my cousin's apartment, and hid there. My reasoning was, if they followed me inside the building, they would see me knocking on their door and get me before anyone answered. Worth noting, if it wasn't obvious, this was before cell phones. I waited for what felt like a few hours, but was probably only 20 minutes or so, before I got enough courage to make the short walk down the row of apartments to mine and tried the door. It was unlocked, so I went inside, and my parents were there sitting on the couch watching TV. They asked me how our game was, completely nonchalantly, and I questioned them and asked them why they didn't pick me up. They both looked confused. They asked me why they would tell me to wait there instead of home when it's a 4-street difference and I had my bike. Once they said that, it did make more sense. But to this day, I swear that they told me to wait there for them. They explained that when they drove up, they told me they were going to leave the door unlocked for me in case I got home before they did. In my excitement of the game, I must have completely misheard them. I simply went to my room after that, never telling them about it, because as a dumb kid, I knew if I said something, they wouldn't let me go play soccer anymore. And that was clearly more important than my physical well-being. I never saw those guys or that car ever again. I look back on it now, and it doesn't matter how fast I was pedaling my bike. They were in a car. They should have and could have caught up if they wanted to. So I don't know what their intentions were. If they were just having a laugh at my expense, if they were trying to scare me, or if they actually had something darker in mind. But I do think back on that day now and get chills every time I realize how much different my life would be right now if they had caught me.